told me casually that the captain was 3 parts drunk in his own cabin. As I assumed the clues, I began asking him some questions about the destination of the ship. He said the ship was bound to Hawaii, but it had to land there first. Where? Said I. It's an island where I live. So far as I know, it hasn't got any name. He stared at me with his nether lip dropping, and looked so willfully stupid of a sudden that it came into my head that he desired to avoid my questions. I had the discretion to ask no more. End of chapter 2.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nate Seff. The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. Chapter 3. The Strange Face. We left the cabin and found a man and a companion obstructing our way. He was standing on the ladder with his back to us, peering over the combing of the hatchway. He was, I could see, misshapen, short, broad, and clumsy, with a crooked back, hairy neck, and a head sunk between his shoulders. He was dressed in dark blue serge, and had peculiarly thick, coarse, black hair. I heard the unseen dogs growl furiously, and forthwith he ducked back, coming into contact with the hand I put out with a thin motion. He turned with animal swiftness. In some indefinable way, the black face thus flashed upon me shocked me profoundly. It was a singularly deformed mouth. The facial part projected, forming something dimly suggestive of one, and the huge half-open mouth showed as big white teeth as I have ever seen. His eyes were bloodshot at the edges, with scarcely a rim of white around the hazel pupils. There was a curious glow of excitement in his face. "Confound you," said Montgomery. "Why the devil don't you get out of the way?" The black-faced man started aside without a word. I went on up the companion, staring at him instinctively a second. Montgomery stayed at the foot of him. "You have no business here, you know," he said in a deliberate tone. "Your place is forward." The black-faced man counted. "He won't have you forward." He spoke slowly, with a queer, hoarse quality to his voice. "Won't have you forward," said Montgomery in a menacing voice. "But I tell you to go." I was saying something further, and looked up at me suddenly and followed me. I had paused halfway through the hatchway, looking back, still astonished beyond measure at the grotesque ugliness of this black-faced creature. I had never beheld such a repulsive and extraordinary face before, and yet, if the contradiction is credible, I experienced at the same time an odd feeling that in some way I had already encountered exactly the features and gestures that now amazed me. Afterwards it occurred to me that probably I had seen him as I was lifted aboard, and yet that scarcely satisfied my suspicion of previous events. Yet how one could have set eyes on so singular a face, and yet forgotten the precise occasion, passed my imagination. Montgomery's movement to follow me released my attention.
Now that I'm done loading that
I
ball.
turned and looked about me at the flush deck of the little steamer. I was already half prepared by the sounds I heard for what I saw. Certainly I had never beheld a deck so dirty. It was littered with scraps of carriage, shreds of green stuff, and indescribable filth. Fastened by chains to the mainmast were a number of grizzly staghounds.
Still drop some out of the bowl.
And barking at me. And by the mizzen,
okay.
a huge puma was cramped in a little iron cage, far too small even to give it turning. Farther under the starboard bulwark were some big hutches containing a number of rabbits. The solitary llama was squeezed in a mere box in the cage forward. The dogs were muzzled by leather straps. The only human being on deck was a gaunt and silent sailor at the wheel. The patched and dirty spankers were tense before the wind, and up aloft the little ship seemed carrying every sail she had. The sky was clear, the sun midway down the western sky. Long waves, capped by the breeze with froth, were running with us. We went past the steersman to the taffrail, and saw the water come foaming under the stern, and the bubbles go dancing and vanishing in the wake. I turned and surveyed the unsavory length of the ship. Is this an ocean menagerie? Said I. Looks like it, said Montgomery. What are these beasts for? Merchandise? Curios? Does the captain think he's going to sell them somewhere in the South Seas? It looks like it, doesn't it? Said Montgomery. He turned toward me. Suddenly we heard a yelp and a volley of furious blasphemy from the companion hatchway, and the deformed man with the black face came up hurriedly. He was immediately followed by a heavy red-haired man in a white cap. At the sight of the former staghounds, who had ill-tired of barking at me by this time, became furious, howling and leaping against their chains. The black hesitated before them, and this gave the red-haired man time to come up with him and deliver a tremendous blow between the shoulder blades. The poor devil went down like a felled ox and rolled in the dirt among the furiously excited dogs. It was lucky for him that they were muzzled. The red-haired man gave a yelp of exultation and stood staggering, and as it seemed to me, in serious danger of either going backwards down the companion hatchway or forwards upon his victim. So soon as the second man had appeared, Montgomery had started forward. "Steady on there," he cried, in a tone of remonstrance. A couple of sailors appeared on the forecastle. The black-faced man, howling in a singular voice, rolled about underneath the feet of the dogs. No one attempted to help. The brutes did their best to worry him, butting their muzzles at him. There was a quick dance of their gray-figured bodies over the clumsy prostrate. The sailors forward shouted as though it was an admirable sport. Montgomery gave an angry exclamation and went striding down the deck, and I followed him. The black-faced man scrambled up and staggered forward, going and leaning over the bulwark by the main shrouds, where he remained, panting and glaring over his shoulder at the dogs. The red-haired man laughed a satisfied laugh. "Look here, Captain," said Montgomery, with his lisp a little accentuated, gripping the elbows of the red-haired man. "This won't do." I stood behind Montgomery. The captain came half round and regarded him with the dull and solemn eyes of a drunken man. "What won't do?" he said, and added, after looking sleepily into Montgomery's face for a minute, "Blasted sawbones." With a sudden movement, he shook his arms free, and after two ineffectual attempts, stuck his freckled fist into his side pocket. "That man's a passenger," said Montgomery. "I'd advise you to keep your hands off him." "Go to hell," said the captain loudly. He suddenly turned and staggered toward the side. "Do what I like on my own ship," he said. I think Montgomery might have left him then, seeing the brute was drunk, but he only turned to shade Taylor and followed the captain to the bulwarks. "Look you here, Captain," he said. "That man of mine is not to be ill-treated. He has been hazed ever since he came aboard." For a minute, alcoholic fumes kept the captain speechless. "Blasted sawbones," was all he considered necessary.
Give me 1 second, everyone.
Montgomery had one of those slow, pertinacious tempers that will warm day after day to a white heat and never again cool to forgiveness. And it's all too that this quarrel has been some time growing. "The man's drunk," said I, perhaps officiously. "He'll do no good." Montgomery gave an ugly twist to his drunkenness. "He's always drunk. You think that excuses his assaulting passengers?" "My ship," began the captain, waving his hand unsteadily towards the pictures, "was a clean ship. Look at it now." It was certainly anything but clean. "Crew," continued the captain, "clean, respectable crew. Well, you agreed to take the beasts. I wish I'd never set eyes on your infernal island. What the devil want beasts for on an island like that? Then that man of yours understood he was a man. He's a lunatic, and he had no business aft. Do you think the whole damn ship belongs to you? Your sailors began to haze the poor devil as soon as he came aboard. That's just what he is. He's a devil, an ugly devil. My men can't stand it. I can't stand it. None of us can stand it, nor you either." Montgomery turned away. "You leave that man alone anyhow," he said, nodding his head as he spoke. The captain meant to quarrel now. He raised his voice. "If he comes this end of the ship again, I'll cut his insides out, I tell you. Cut out his blasted insides. Who are you to tell me what I'm to do? I tell you I'm the captain of this ship, captain and owner. I'm the law here, I tell you. The law and the prophets. I bargained to take a man and his attendant to and from Africa and bring back some animals. I never bargained to carry a mad devil and a silly sawbones. Well, never mind when he called me to go. I saw the latter take a step forward. He was he's drunk, so innocent, abusing, Shut up, I said, turning on him sharply, for I had seen danger in Montgomery's white face. With that, I brought the downpour on us. However, I was glad to avert it with uncommonly near scuffle, even at the price of the captain's drunken ill will. I do not think I have ever heard quite so much vile language come in a continuous stream from any man's lips, though I have frequented eccentric company enough. I found some of it hard to endure, though I am a mild-tempered man, but certainly, when I told the captain to shut up, I had forgotten that I was merely a bit of human philosophy, cut off from my resources, my fare and pay, mere casual dependent on the man, or speculative enterprise. Shit. He reminded me of considerable vigor, but at any rate, I was in. End of chapter 3.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Corey Samuel. The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. Chapter 4. At the Schooner. That night, land was sighted after sundown, and the schooner hove to. Montgomery intimated that was his destination. It was too far to see any details. It seemed to me then simply a low-lying patch of dim blue in the uncertain blue-grey sea. An almost vertical streak of smoke went up from it into the sky. The captain was not on deck when it was sighted. After he had vented his wrath on me, he had staggered below, and I understood he went to sleep on the floor of his own cabin. The mate practically assumed the command. He was the gaunt, taciturn individual we had seen at the wheel. Apparently, he was in an evil temper with Montgomery. He took not the slightest notice of either of us. We dined with him in a sulky silence, after a few ineffectual efforts on my part to talk. It struck me, too, that the men regarded my companion and his animals in a singularly unfriendly manner. I found Montgomery very reticent about his purpose with these creatures and about his destination, and though I was sensible of a growing curiosity as to both, I did not press him. We remained talking on the quarterdeck until the sky was thick with stars. Except for an occasional sound in the yellow-lit forecastle and a movement of the animals now and then, the night was very still. The puma lay crouched together, watching us with shining eyes, a black heap in the corner of its cage. Montgomery produced some cigars. He talked to me of London in a tone of half-pain.
Hey, Panda Cat, how you doing, bro?
Questions about changes
Thanks for stopping by.
He spoke like a man who had loved his life there and had been suddenly and irrevocably.
Yeah, today it's
I got as I could of this
the island of Dr.
All the
Moreau.
time, the strangeness of him was shaping itself in my mind, and as I talked, I peered at his odd, pallid face in the dim light of the binnacle lantern behind me. Then I looked out at the darkling sea, where in the dimness his little island was hidden. This man, it seemed to me,
Hell yeah, Panda Cat. It's always good to take it easy once in a while.
tomorrow he would drop over the side and vanish again out of my existence. Even had it been under commonplace circumstances, it would have made me a trifle thoughtful. But in the first place was the singularity of an educated man living on this unknown little island, and coupled with that the extraordinary nature of his luggage. I found myself repeating the captain's question, what did he want with the beasts? Why, too, had he pretended they were not his when I had remarked about them at first? Then, again, in his personal attendant there was a bizarre quality which had impressed me profoundly. These circumstances threw a haze of mystery.
How's the weather where you're at right
They
now,
laid hold of
Panda
my
Cat?
imagination and hampered my tongue. Towards midnight, our talk of London died away, and we stood side by side, leaning over the bulwarks and staring dreamily over the silent, starlit sea, each pursuing his own thoughts. It was the atmosphere for sentiment, and I began upon my gratitude.
What's everyone smoking on today?
That's it, said I, after
If you're smoking on
you
anything.
could save my life. Chance, he said.
Warm but not
Just
hot.
chance.
Hell yeah.
I prefer to make my thanks to the others, agent. Thank no one. You had the need and I had the knowledge, and I injected.
Shit over here, it's always hot. It's just degrees of hot. We got a normal hot, then we got hot as shit.
Or hadn't liked your face. Well,
Oh shit. 76 right now. Let's see what we're at over here.
at any rate,
We're at
it's a
80,
chance.
82 degrees over here.
Everything is in a man's life.
And it's
And
9/11
yes,
right now.
see it. Why am I here now?
Hey,
Now,
Migs,
after
how you doing, bro?
civilization, instead of being a happy man enjoying all pleasures of London, simply because 11 years ago I lost my head for 10 minutes on a foggy night. He stopped.
Hope everyone's doing well tonight
Said I?
and staying safe out there.
We relapsed into silence. Presently he laughed. There's something in this starlight that loosens a man's tongue. I'm an ass, and yet somehow I would like to tell you. Whatever you tell me, you may rely on my talking to myself, if that's it. And then shook his head. Don't. He was all saying to me, after all, it is better to keep your secret. There's nothing.
Oh, I'm not doing too bad.
If I respect your confidence. If I don't. He grunted undecidedly. I felt
That one
it
reaches
as
up in your
advantage
lungs and
and caught
punches
him
you.
in the mood of indiscretion. And to tell the truth, I was not curious to learn what might have driven a young medical student out of London. I have an imagination. I shrugged my shoulders and turned away. Over the taffrail leaned a silent black figure watching the stars. It was Montgomery's strange attendant. It looked over its shoulder quickly with my movement, then looked away again. It may seem a little thing to you, perhaps, but it came like a sudden blow to me. The only light near us was a lantern at the wheel. The creature's
Hope everyone's
face was
doing well
turned for
tonight.
a brief instant out of the dimness of the stern towards this illumination, and I saw that the eyes that glanced at me shone with a pale green light. I did not know then that a reddish luminosity, at least, is not uncommon in human eyes. The thing came to me as stark inhumanity. That black figure, with its eyes of fire, struck down through all my adult thoughts and feelings, and for one moment the forgotten horrors of childhood came back to my mind. Then the effect passed as it had come. An uncouth black figure of a man, a figure of no particular import, hung over the taffrail against the starlight, and I found Montgomery was speaking to me. I'm thinking of turning in there, said he, if you've had enough of this. I answered him incongruously. We went below, and he wished me good night at the door of my cabin. That night I had some very unpleasant dreams. The waning moon rose late. Its light struck a ghostly white beam across my cabin, and made an ominous shape on the planking by my bunk. Then the staghounds woke, and began howling and baying, so that I dreamt fitfully, and scarcely slept until the approach of dawn. End of chapter 4.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marty DeBrasky. The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. Chapter 5. The Man Who Had Nowhere to Go. In the early morning, it was the second morning after my recovery, and I believe the fourth after I was picked up. I woke on an avenue of tumultuous.
Anyone got any plans for the weekend coming up?
Howling mobs, and became sensible of a horse shouting above me. I rubbed my eyes and lay listening to the noise, doubtful for a little while of my whereabouts. Then came a sudden pattering of bare feet, the sound of heavy objects being thrown about, a violent creaking and the rattling of chains. I heard the swish of the water as the ship was suddenly brought round, and a foamy yellow-green wave flew across the little round window and left it streaming. I jumped into my clothes and went on deck. As I came up the ladder, I saw against the flushed sky, the sun was just rising, the broad back and red hair of the captain, and over his shoulder the puma spinning from a tackle rigged onto the mizzen spanker boom. The poor brute seemed horribly scared and crouched in the bottom of its little cage. "Overboard with him," bawled the captain. "Overboard with him. We'll have a clean ship soon of the whole biling of him." He stood in my way, so that I had perforce to tap his shoulder to come on deck. He came round with a start and staggered back a few paces to stare at me. It needed no expert eye to tell that the man was still drunk. "Hello," said he stupidly, and then with a light coming into his eyes.
Hell yeah, I saw that little keychain you were doing. Kind of like I do the similar stuff, but I do mine out of a paracord.
"Mister, shut up." There was no good answering him, but I certainly did not expect his next move. He held out his hand to the gangway by which my...
And what's good about this is, if you need to, you can just pull it off your belt, just like that, and smack the shit out of someone if you need to.
mean, I said. That way, Mr. Blasted Shut Up. That's what I mean. Overboard, Mr. Shut Up. And Sharp. We're cleaning the ship out. Cleaning the whole blessed ship out.
I have this.
And overboard you go.
I have to show it on
Nice ship out. Don't
whenever I do it live again at the house, because that's where it's at.
everything I wanted.
But it's my first dog leash I made, and with as much paracord that's in there,
Can't have
that thing's liable to hold a fucking bull.
Precisely. You can't have me, said Mom. Gas. He had the squarest
I do that. I do
face I ever set eyes upon.
the bracelets, dog collars, dog leashes.
Overboard.
Now, if I have the right jig set up, I might look into
Overboard you go, Mr. Shut Up.
whatchamacallit,
They can't have you.
getting a bigger jig to where I could actually do like rifle slings, guitar slings,
With your friend.
longer
I'm
leashes.
done with this blessed island forevermore.
Now I need to get one too because I have a bracelet one that could do different sizes, and it could make like small dog collars.
I'll see to you, present.
Hell yeah!
Then began a curious three-cornered altercation. Ultimately, I appealed to one and another.
But I need to get actually two different sets of jigs. The bigger ones I could do like
And to the drunken captain to keep me
the
aboard. I even bawled
the
entry.
leashes and rifle slings and guitar slings.
Only shook his head.
I need another one so I can actually do dog collars. Because the jig I have, I can make a dog collar be for like a little puppy or a small chihuahua. I need ones so I can make bigger ones for like be put on bigger dogs like pit bulls, Rottweilers, shepherds, and whatnot. They say when I work with the paracord, I have to take my fingers up on both sides and some of my other fingers just because from pulling on it, it will actually rub my skin raw to where if I don't tape them up, I have to trash what I'm working on because it'll start getting all kinds of blood in the paracord just from rubbing my fingers raw.
The captain went forward, interfering rather than assisting. I was alternately despairful and desperate. Once or twice, as I stood waiting there for things to accomplish themselves, I could not resist an impulse to laugh at my miserable quandary. I felt all the wretcheder for the lack of a breakfast, hunger, and a lack of blood.
I would imagine.
I perceived pretty clearly that I had not the stamina either to resist what the captain chose to do to expel me.
Yeah, 'cause when it does that, that shit sucks. It takes so long to heal just because you use your hands all the time.
And the work of transferring Montgomery's possessions to the launch went on as if I did not exist. Presently,
What I want to try making next is that's also the reason I want to get a jig that's a lot bigger. Is I want to make a paracord belt. Cause that one's gonna take a lot of paracord, but it's also at least it's gonna be a little bit more challenging for me. I'm in my head. I think it'd be like the same way that they weave blankets. How they put a thread up here, then you just push it forward, and then there's a repeat process like that, pushing it forward. But I could be wrong on. I've seen different styles of belts, so I think it would all depend on what type of braid or knotwork you want on the belt.
In a kind of stupor, I watched all hands take to the rigging, and slowly but surely she came round to the wind. The sails fluttered, and then
But that's what you should do before you do your hemp work, Panda Cat, is
and then she passed out of my range.
at least it's what I use, that cloth medical tape. Just tape your fingers up, and it actually helps, definitely helps when you're getting your fingers done raw.
Then I realized that I was in that little hell of mine again, now half swamped. And looking back over the gunwale, I saw the schooner standing away from me, the red-haired captain mocking at me over the taffrail. And turning towards the island, saw the launch growing smaller as she approached the beach. Abruptly, the cruelty of this desertion became clear to me. I had no means of reaching the land unless I should chance to drift there. I was still weak. My explosion in the boat. I was empty and very full.
And then I even got I actually got it as a present from Ouija Buds. It's like a whole little set like this of like has different sized paracord needles because you put the paracord in it, and it's better for like threading and weaving through. But it's that and like a flat little piece of metal that you could use to like push up on it, tighten like areas up. But it's a pretty awesome little setup. Definitely opens up yeah, kind of like a loom. Hey, Big Daddy. Because I've seen them done that way to where they braid them like, because I have like about 6-8 strands and then just braid it through. And then I've seen ones that actually do like the knots for the bracelets just wider, and it's like 2 of them coming down all the way on the belts. How you doing, Big Daddy? Well, I'm not saying wearing gloves. I'm just like use that cloth medical tape on your fingers. Because the gloves, I wouldn't be able to do it either working paracord. That's why I'll tape up like whatever parts of my hand I use to tighten my knot. That's where I put the tape at. And for me, it's on my pinky, so I just tape it from about here to the start of your first knuckle right here. That's what I usually do. Hell yeah, Big Daddy. That's good to hear. Oh shit, crochet needles, hell yeah.
I was jerked back as the rope tightened between the boats. For some time, I was busy bailing.
I had the paracord needles are pretty cool because you can just put the end of the paracord in the back of it, like screw it in a little bit. Then it's like you have a sewing needle at the end of your paracord. Hey, OG, how you doing?
Of some perplexity. When my eyes met his, he looked down at the staghound that sat between his knees. He was a powerfully built man, as I have said, with a fine forehead and rather heavy features. But his eyes had that odd drooping of the skin above the lids, which often comes with advancing years, and the fall of his heavy mouth at the corners gave him an expression of pugnacious.
Trying to figure out how to drop a link to see if anyone wanted to come in. Oh, my day wasn't too bad, OG.
I saw only their faces, yet there was something in their faces, I knew not what, that gave me a queer spasm of disgust. I looked steadily at them, and the impression did not pass, though I failed to see what had occasioned it. They seemed to me then to be brown men.
And me, I got.
Oddly swathed in some thin, dirty white stuff.
That's what I got left that my cousin brought me last night.
And women so only in the East. They wore turbans too, and thereunder peered out their elfin faces at me. Faces with protruding lower jaws and bright eyes. They had lank black hair, almost like horses, and seemed as they sat to exceed in stature any race man I have ever seen. The white-haired woman, who I knew was a good 6 feet in height, sat a head below any one of the 3. I found afterwards that really none were taller than myself, but their bodies were abnormally long, and the thigh part of the legs short, curiously twisted. At any rate, they were an amazingly ugly gang, and over the heads of them, under the forward log, peered the black face of the man whose eyes were luminous in the dark. As I stared at them, they met my gaze, and then first one and then another turned away from my direct stare and looked at me in an odd, furtive manner. It occurred to me that I was perhaps annoying them, and I turned my attention to the island they were approaching. It was low.
Had to load another bow.
Chiefly a kind of pearl that was new.
This is probably gonna be my last bowl. Piece of smoke.
We were now within the embrace of a broad bay, flanked on either hand by a low promontory. The beach was of dull gray sand and sloped steeply up to a ridge, perhaps 60 or 70 feet above the sea level, and irregularly set with trees and undergrowth. Halfway up was a square enclosure of some grayish stone, which I found subsequently was built partly of coral and partly of pumiceous lava. 2 thatched roofs peeped from within this enclosure. A man stood awaiting us at the water's edge. I fancied while we were still far off that I saw some other and very grotesque-looking creatures scuttle into the bushes upon the slope, but I saw nothing of these as we drew nearer. This man was of moderate size and with a black negroid face. He had a large, almost lipless mouth, extraordinary lank arms, long thin feet and bow legs, and stood with his heavy face thrust forward, staring at us.
Anyone got any plans for their weekend?
In jacket and trousers of blue serge. As we came still nearer, this individual began to run to and fro on the beach, making the most grotesque movements. At a word of command from Montgomery, the 4 men in the launch sprang up and with singularly awkward gestures struck the lugs. Montgomery steered us round and into a narrow little dock excavated in the beach. Then the man on the beach hastened towards us. This dock, as I call it, was really a mere ditch, just long enough at this phase of the tide to take the long boat. I heard the bows ground in the sand, staved the dinghy off the
Hey, the goddess, how you doing?
freeing the painter, landed. The 3 muffled men, with the clumsy
This Lone Bull, I'm not smoking resin now. My cousin dropped me off a little bit of a smoke last night.
I was struck, especially by the curious movement.
Well, that's the last little bit of it.
Not stiff, but distorted in some odd way.
Hell yeah, Panda Cat.
In the wrong place. The dogs were still snarling and strained at their chains after these men, as the white-haired man landed with them. The 3 big fellows spoke to one another in odd, guttural tones, and the man who had waited for us on the beach began chattering to them excitedly, a foreign language, as I fancied, as they laid hands on some bales piled near the stern. Somewhere I had heard such a voice before, and I could not think where. The white-haired man stood, holding the tumult of 6 dogs, and bawling orders over their din. Montgomery, having unshipped the rudder, landed likewise, and all set to work at unloading. I was too faint, what with the long fast and the sun beating down on my bare head, to offer any assistance. Presently, the white-haired man seemed to recollect my presence, and came up to me. "You look," said he, "as though you had scarcely breakfasted." His little eyes were brilliant black under his heavy
Hell
brows.
yeah, Panda
I must
Cat.
apologize for that. Now you are our guest. We must make you comfortable, though you are uninvited. He looked keenly into my face. Montgomery says you are an educated man, Mr. Trinket. Says you know something of science. May I ask what that signifies? I told him I had spent some years at the Royal College of Science and had done some researches in biology under Huxley. He raised his eyebrows slightly. That alters the case a little, Mr. Trinket, he said, with a trifle more respect in his manner. As it happens, we are biologists here. This is a biological station, of a sort. His eye rested on the men in white who were busily hauling the puma on rollers towards the walled yard.
Still trying to look on here to where I could drop that invite link.
And
Just
when
can't
you
see
veer
where
the
it's
other
at.
way, I can't say. We're off the track to anywhere. We see a ship once in 12 months or so. He left me abruptly and went up the beach past this group, and I think entered the enclosure. The other 2 men were with Montgomery, erecting a pile of smaller packages on a low-wheeled truck. The llama was still on the launch with the rabid hutches. The staghounds were still leashed to the thwarts. The pile of things completed, all 3 men laid hold of the truck and began shoving the ton weight or so on it after the puma. Presently, Montgomery left them, and coming back to me, "I'm glad, for my own part. That captain was a silly ass. He'd have made things lively. It was you."
Oh shit. Hell yeah, OG.
You'll find this island an infernally run place, I promise you. I'd watch my goings carefully. He hesitated and seemed to alter his mind about what was on his list. "I wish you'd help me with these rabbits," he said. This procedure with the rabbits was
Hell
serious.
yeah, OG.
I waded in with him and helped him lug one of the hutches ashore. No sooner was that done than he opened the door of it, and tilting the thing on one end, turned its living contents out on the ground. They fell in a struggling heap, one on top of the other. He clapped his hands, and forthwith they went off with the hopping run of theirs, 15 or 20 of them, I should think, up the beach. "Increase and multiply, my friends," said Montgomery. "Replenish the island."
Hell yeah,
But
Panda Cat.
had a certain lack of meat here. As I watched them disappearing, the white-haired man returned with a brandy flask and some biscuits. "Something to go on with, Wendick," said he, a far more familiar term.
What are you smoking on, OG?
I made no ado, but set to work on the biscuits at once, while the white-haired man helped Montgomery to release about a score more of the rabbits. 3 big hutchins, however, went up to the house with the puma. The brandy I did not touch, for I have been an abstainer from my birth. End of chapter 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit.
Oh shit, it's 5 different types of mix, huh? You got a little salad bowl going, huh?
The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. Chapter 7. The Locked Door. The reader will perhaps understand that at first everything was so strange about it. And my position was the outcome of such...
They had something like that they used to sell whenever I was up in Cali, up in Venice. They had a little part you could get. It was a cheaper stuff. And it was usually, it's called salad bowl. It was all the shake from all their strains pretty much. They had all the shake in one container and they would actually sell it. It was cheaper than like everything else just because it was shake, but half the times you can get some good shit mixed. Oh shit, roaches, huh? I'm almost on my last bowl of smoke that my cousin brought me. I remember one time my buddy went to the dispensary up there and he got some shake that was like that, and the mix that it was LA Confidential and Pineapple Express was what the shake was, so that one wasn't too bad of a mix.
There's my room with the outer door. That's it, said the elder man promptly, looking at Montgomery, and all 3 of us went towards the enclosure.
Oh shit. Hell yeah.
But you'll remember you're uninvited. Our little establishment here contains a secret or so. It's a kind of Bluebeard's chamber, in fact.
This one I forgot to ask my cousin what it was.
Decidedly set out. I should be a fool to take offense at any want of confidence. He twisted his heavy mouth into a faint smile. He was one of those saturnine people who smiled with the corners.
I remember smoking that too.
And bowed his acknowledgement of my...
I remember getting little things like they're about like that and about like that, and that was pretty much a pound. Once you broke it up, it filled up like a gallon bag. But I remember seeing it with the rolling tray, just tossing seeds to the side.
His keys, the elaborate locking up of the place, even while it was still under his eye, struck me as peculiar. I followed him and found myself in a small apartment.
I definitely remember those days. I remember days that it was just, you had that Mexican dirt weed or you had some decent Reggie. There was no chronic at the time, no grade, nothing like what we have nowadays.
This, the white-haired man told me, was to be my apartment.
Oh shit.
The inner door, which, for fear of accidents, he said, he would lock on the other side, was my limit inward. He called my attention to
Yeah, some of the shit from back in the day, that was some pretty potent shit for it not being high grade. I remember I had one time I ended up getting a half, and it was about a nug, like almost one big nug like that, and like that. Just like they cut it off the plant and just trimmed it up and it was dried. And I remember I had that triple bag in my pocket, and my homie could still smell that shit. Right? Back then it was just either regular Reggie or you had, what was it, mid-grade?
Through the window, I saw one of those unaccountable men in white, lugging a packing case along the beach. Presently, the window frame hid me.
I've had some Tyree too. Right, Tree Cron. Yeah, I remember them days when it was just either you had your average fucking Reggie or you had some dank Reggie. I remember getting ones back in the day that were straight, all kinds of red and orange hairs on them. I remember ounces was supposed to be 4-finger ounce. Oh shit, you still got seeds in it somewhere, huh? I remember back in the day weighing your bags out with the fucking poultry scale. You had to hold very still. Half the time, people had a thumbtack on the wall that they'd hang it from and hang the baggie. That way, they gave you a perfect reading.
And when they did speak, endowed with very uncanny voices. What was wrong with them?
The Colombian gold days.
Just as I was thinking when he came in, he was not dressed in white and carried a little tray with some coffee and boiled vegetables.
Right, the red bud.
Then amiably placed the on the table. Then astonishment paralyzed me. Under his stringy black locks, I saw his ears.
What they call the Centimia bud.
Pointed ears, covered with fine brown fur. Your breakfast, sir, he said. I stared at his face without a
I knew, oh shit, that stuff was
He
good.
turned and went towards the door, regarding me oddly over his shoulder. I followed him out with my eyes, and as I did so, by some odd trick of unconscious cerebration, there came surging into my head the phrase, the Moreau Hollows. Was it? The Moreau... Ah! Set my memory back 10 years. The Moreau Horrors. The phrase drifted loose on my mind for a moment, and then I saw it in red lettering on a little buffaloed pamphlet, to read which made one shiver and creep. Then I remembered distinctly all about it. That long-forgotten pamphlet came back with startling vividness to my mind. I had been a mere lad then, and Moreau was, I suppose, about 50, a prominent and masterful physiologist.
I remember the skunk they had back in the day. That shit was pretty stinky too.
And his brutal directness in discussion. Was this the same Moreau? He had published some very astonishing facts in connection with the transfusion of blood, and in addition was known to do invaluable work on morbid growths. Then suddenly his career was closed. He had to leave England. A journalist obtained access to his laboratory in the capacity of laboratory assistant with the deliberate intention of making sensational exposures. And by the help of a shocking accident, if it was an accident, his gruesome pamphlet became notorious. On the day of its publication, a wretched dog, flayed and otherwise mutilated, escaped from Moreau's house. It was in the silly season, and a prominent editor, a cousin of the temporary laboratory assistant, appealed to the conscience of the nation.
That shit tasted
It was
bad.
not the first time that conscience had turned against the methods of research. The doctor was simply
Are you talking about peyote?
and maybe that he deserved to be. But I still think that the tepid support of his fellow investigators and his desertion by the great body of
I definitely remember mushroom
was a
days.
shameful thing. Yet some of his experiments by
Shit,
his own
mushrooms,
were wanton
acid.
and cruel. He might perhaps have purchased his social peace by abandoning his investigation.
Done plenty of
He
both.
apparently preferred the latter, as most men would who have once fallen under the overmastering spell of research. He was unmarried and had indeed nothing but his own interest to consider. I felt convinced that this must be the same man. Everything pointed to it. It dawned upon me to what end the puma and the other animals.
Down, it says surprised you lived through the 70s and 80s, huh?
Around the house were destined. And a curious faint odor, the holitis of something familiar, an odor that had been in the background of my consciousness.
Oh yeah, acid.
Suddenly came forward into the forefront of my thoughts. It was the antiseptic odor of the dissecting room. I heard the puma growling through the wall, and one of the dogs yelped as though it had been struck. Yet surely, and especially to another scientific man, there was nothing so horrible and vivid
Oh shit.
as to account for this secrecy.
The only thing that sucks about doing acid and shrooms, you still want to smoke, of course, but it don't get you high. You can smoke and smoke. Oh shit, hell yeah, Panda Cat.
What could it all mean? A locked enclosure on a lonely island, a notorious vivisector in this
I mean, fuck that, I'll just eat them.
end of chapter 7.
Oh shit, like a month ago. Hell yeah.
This is a LibriVox recording, and all LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Listening to Mobius, The Island of Dr. Moreau, Chapter 8, The Crying of the Puma. Montgomery,
interrupted my temperance vacation by suspicion about 1 o'clock, and his grotesque attendant followed him with a tray bearing bread, some herbs and other eatables, a flask of whiskey, a jug of water and 3 glasses, and knives. I glanced askance at this strange creature, and found him watching me with his queer, restless eyes. Montgomery said he would lunch with me, but that Moreau was too preoccupied with some work to come. Moreau, said I know that name. The devil you do, said he. What an ass I was to mention it to you. I might have thought. Anyhow, it will give you an inkling of our...
Shit, I think I've done, it's been a while, but I ended up doing some mescaline before too. Now that mescaline, that was a fucking,
There's no use locking the door after
that
the
was a
steed is
journey.
stolen. It was that infernal stuff that led to my coming. That
So, damn, had some fresh ones
I
there.
myself in luck at the time when Moreau offered to get me off. It's queer. Montgomery.
So nowadays you can grow them yourself.
Why has your man pointed ears? Damn, he said, over his first mouthful of food. He stared at me for a moment and then repeated, pointed ears? Little points to them, said I, as calmly as possible, with a catch in my breath. And a
For
fine
days,
black
huh?
fur at the edges. He helped himself to whiskey and water with great deliberation.
It just probably felt like the hours felt like days.
I saw them as he stood by me to put that coffee you sent me on the table, and his eyes shine in the dark. But this time Montgomery had recovered from the surprise of my question. I always thought, he said,
Right.
with a certain
Definitely the good old days there.
if there was something the matter with his ears from the way he covered them. What were they like? I was persuaded from his manner that his
Yeah, I never made it to Fed. I made it to just the state college.
Pointed.
Definitely don't miss
rather
that.
small and furry. Distinctly furry. But the whole man is one of the strangest beings I have ever set eyes on. The sharp, hoarse cry of animal pain came from the enclosure.
Younger days didn't want to listen to no one, and
Testified to the pool. I saw Montgomery wince.
definitely cost me.
Yes. He said. Where did you pick up the creature? San Francisco.
Hey, Shaw's Prospecting, how you doing?
Half-witted, you know. Can't remember where he came from. But I'm used to
Mine was actually in a capsule,
it. How does he strike you?
so I didn't taste the bitterness of it.
There's something about it.
I think it was a purple mescaline.
But it gives me a nasty little sensation. Tightening of my muscles.
Purple or red, I can't remember. It's been several years.
Touch of the diabolic, in fact. Montgomery had stopped eating while I told him. Rum! I can't see it.
Yeah, I paid mine too.
I had no idea of it.
Oh, you had the brew? Not mine were like little capsules.
Saying, made a dead set of the poor devil. He saw the captain.
And I ended up letting mine
This time,
dissolve partially underneath my tongue.
Montgomery swore under his breath. I had half a mind to attack him about the man on the beach. And the poor brute within gave vent to a series of short, sharp cries. Your men on the beach, said, what race are they? Excellent fellows, aren't they? Said he.
Oh shit. Damn. I'd definitely be tired too, Shaw's Prospecting. That's a hell of a fucking workout there. My arms be hurting, my shoulders be hurting, my back will be hurting.
Alcohol professing to have saved my life with it. He seemed anxious to lay stress on the fact that I owned my life. I answered him distraught.
Hell yeah, OG.
Presently our meal came to an end. The misshapen monster with the pointed ears cleared the remains away. Montgomery left me alone in the room again. All the time he had been in a state of ill-concealed irritation at the noise of the vivisected pool. He had spoken of his odd wanted nerve and left me to the obvious application. I found myself that the cries were singularly irritating.
Hell yeah, that's always good.
Intensity as the afternoon
have more room to be able to do a lot more
They were
shit.
painful at first, but their constant
It's like an upgrade.
at last altogether upset my balance. I flung aside a grip of horror inside me and began to clench my fists, to bite my lips, to pace the room. Presently I got to stopping my ears with my fingers. The emotional appeal of those yells grew upon me steadily, grew at last to such an exquisite expression of suffering that I could stand it in that confined room no longer. I stepped out of the door into the slumberous heat of the late afternoon, and walking past the main entrance, locked again, turned the corner of the wall. The crying sounded even louder out of doors. It was as if all the pain in the world had found a voice.
Hell yeah, Shaws.
Known such pain was in the next room. It had been done by the pain. I have thought since I could have stood it well enough. It is when suffering finds a voice and sets our nerves quivering that this pity comes from us. In spite of the brilliant sunlight, the trees waving, the world was a confusion, blurred with drifting black and red phantasms, until I was out of earshot of the house with the checkered wall.
I should need a big truck with the 50 cal on it, huh?
This is a LibriVox recording, and all LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Stefan Mobius. The Island of Dr. Moreau, Chapter 9. The Thing in the Forest. I strolled through the undergrowth that closed the ridge behind the house, scarcely heeding whither I went. Passed on through the shadows.
Alright, they definitely don't have respect out there on the roads nowadays.
And so presently found myself some way on the other side of the ridge, and descending towards a streamlet that ran through a narrow valley. I paused and listened. In the distance,
That's what you do. You have your
the intervening mass
car
of
all
dead
mad maxed out with spikes and mounted guns. Just have the guns like for show, the real guns, but make them think that they're real.
went scampering.
They'll behave on the road.
I hesitated and sat down at the edge of the shade. The place was
That's what you
pleasant.
do. You have the guns up there, but had a firing pin out.
Soon reinvented
That way you can't get in trouble.
safe at one point, where I caught a triangular patch of its glittering water. On the farther side, I saw through the bluish haze of a tangle of trees and creepers, and above these, again, the luminous blue of the sky. Here and there, a splash of white and crimson marked the glooming of some trailing epiphyte. I let my eyes wander over this scene for a while, and then began to turn over in my mind again the strange peculiarities of Montgomery's man. But it was too hard to think elaborately. Presently, I fell into a tranquil state, midway between dozing and waking. From this I was aroused, after I know not how long, by rustling amidst the greenery on the other side of the stream. For a moment I could see nothing but the wavings amidst the ferns and reeds. Then suddenly, upon the bank of the stream appeared something. At first I could not distinguish what it was. It bounded so far ahead of the water and began to drink. I saw it was a man, going on all fours like a beast. He was clothed in bluish cloth. He was of a copper-colored hue, with black hair. It seemed that grotesque ugliness was an invariable character of these islanders. I could hear the suck of the water.
It's actually a
I leaned forward to
liver box.
and a piece of
Since
glass
all those titles fall under the public domain,
He looked up
but
at
it's
me, and his eyes met mine.
The Island of Dr.
Forthwith,
Monroe
scrambled
by
to his feet,
H.G. Wells.
wiping his clumsy hand across his mouth and regarding me. His legs were scarcely half the length of his body.
But the liver box one's actually a free one.
We remained for
They do got
perhaps
titles that
then
you could
stopped
purchase on it,
once or twice,
but most of the titles on there are for free.
to the right of me,
At least a good
and I
portion
heard
of
the
them,
swish
and they
of
all
the
fall
frogs
under a
around me.
public domain.
Long after he had disappeared, I remained sitting up staring in the direction.
Yeah, the movie was definitely
drowsy tranquility had
definitely a little odd.
I was startled by
But I've read the book before, and
my tale of a rage.
I think the book's a lot better than what the movie was. So that's why I ended up downloading the movie or the audio book of it.
I looked around me, rather nervous.
'Cause I could get away with playing these ones and not get in trouble because they all fall in the public domain. I have an Audible account, but I don't think I can play those.
I tried to persuade myself from the fact that he was, after all, probably a peaceful character. The dull ferocity of his countenance belied him. Yet I was greatly disturbed at the apparition.
Huh? They're using sign language, huh?
Along the slope,
Out where?
my hand about and peering this way and that among the straight stems of the trees. Why should a man go on all fours and drink with his lips? Presently I heard an animal wailing again, and taking it to be the pool, I turned about and walked in a direction diametrically opposite.
You know the bird?
This led me
The bird's the word.
across which I stepped and pushed my way up through the undergrowth beyond. I was startled by the way that it's gone. Going up to it, found it to be a peculiar fungus, wrenched and corrugated like a foliaceous leech, but delicacy into slime at the touch. And then, in the shadow of some luxuriant ferns, I came upon an unpleasant thing. The dead body of a rabbit, covered with shining flies, still walked with a head torn off. I stopped aghast at the sight of the scattered blood. Here at last it was one visitor to the island disposed of. There were no traces of other violence about it. It looked as though it had been suddenly snatched up and killed. And as I stared at the little furry body came the difficulty of how the thing had been done. The vague dread had been in my mind since I had seen the inhumane face of the man at the stream. Grew distincter as I stood there. I began to realize the hardihood of my expedition among these unknown people. The thicket about me became altered to my imagination. Every shadow became something more than a shadow. Became an ambush. Every rustle became a threat. Invisible things seemed watching me. I resolved to go back to the enclosure on the beach. Suddenly turned away, thrust myself even frantically through the trees, anxious to get a clear space about me. I stopped just in time to prevent myself emerging upon an open space. It was a kind of glade in the forest, made by a fall. Seedlings were already starting up the strand for the vacant spaces beyond, a dense growth of stems and twining vines, splashes of flowers closed in again. Before me, squatting together upon the fungoid ruins of a huge fallen tree, and still unaware of my approach, were three grotesque human figures. One was evidently female, the other two were men. They were naked, save for a swathing of scarlet cloth about the middle, and their skins were of dull pinkish drab color, such as I had seen in no savages before. They had fat, heavy, chinless faces, retreating foreheads, and a scant, bristly hair upon their heads. I never saw such bestial-looking creatures. They were
No shit, you need a giant bird sticker.
or at least one of the men was talking to the other two, and all three had been too closely interested to heed the rustling of my approach. They swayed their heads and shoulders from side to side. The speaker's words came thick and sloppy, and though I could hear them distinctly, I could
Thanks.
not
It's my aunt's dog. It's from
It seemed to me to
I'm house sitting and dog sitting,
complicated gibberish.
and this is her little puppy.
Presently, his arm
Her name's Lulu.
and spreading his hands, he rose to his feet. At that, the others began to gibber in unison, also rising to their feet,
Hell yeah.
spreading their hands and swaying their bodies in rhythm with their chants.
She's tired.
Notice then the abnormal sharpness of their legs and their lank, clumsy feet.
So not used to it late nights that I stay up.
Raising and stamping their feet
Now my
away
brother's
from
dog is
kind of tune crept
15, and he actually has to
and a refrain.
take him in tomorrow and have him put down.
It sounded like
But he's had that dog since that dog was born.
with an expression of
He actually helped deliver that dog.
from their lipless
and he's had them for 15 years.
Suddenly, as I watched their grotesque and unaccountable,
But he's real bad right now, and
for the first time,
he has to go take him in tomorrow and have him put
what had
down.
given me the two
But he is gonna
consistent
have him
conflicting
cremated,
impressions of utter
so he'll have his ashes.
yet of the strangest familiarity. The three creatures engaged in this mysterious rite were human in shape, and yet human beings with the strangest air about them of
Yeah, it is sad.
animal. Each of these creatures,
Right, that
despite
is
its
family.
form, its rag of clothing, and the
That's his
rough
boy.
of its bodily form, had woven into it, into its movements, into the expression of its countenance, into its whole presence, some irresistible suggestion of a hawk, a swinish tide, the unmistakable mark of the beast. I stood overcome by this amazing realization. And then the most horrible questionings came rushing into my mind. They began leaping in the air, first one, then the other, whooping and grunting. Then one slipped, and for a moment was on all fours, to recover indeed forthwith. But that transitory gleam of the true animalism of these monsters was enough. I turned as noiselessly as possible, and becoming every now and then rigid with the fear of being discovered, as a branch cracked or a leaf rustled, I pushed back into the bushes. It was long before I grew bolder and dared to move free. My only idea for the moment was to get away from these foul beings, and I scarcely noticed that I had emerged upon a faint pathway amidst the trees. Then suddenly, traversing a little glade, I saw with an unpleasant start two clumsy legs among the trees, walking with noiseless footsteps parallel with my course, perhaps 30 yards away from me. The head and upper part of the body were hidden by a tangle of creeper. I stopped abruptly, hoping the creature did not see me. The feet stopped as I did. So nervous was I that I controlled an impulse to headlong flight with the utmost difficulty. Then looking hard, I distinguished through the interlacing network the head and body of the brute I had seen drinking. He moved his head. There was an emerald flash in his eye as he glanced at me from the shadow of the trees, a half-luminous color that vanished as he turned his head again. He was motionless for a moment. Then, with a noiseless tread, began running through the green confusion. In another moment he had vanished behind some bushes. I could not see, but I felt that he had stopped and was watching me again. What on earth was he? Man or beast? What did he want with me? I had no weapon, not even a stick. Flight would be madness. At any rate, the thing, whatever it was, lacked the courage to attack me. Setting my teeth hard, I walked straight.
1 second.
I was anxious not to show the fear that seemed chilling my backbone. I pushed through a tangle of tall, white-flowered bushes and saw him 20 paces beyond, looking over his shoulder at me and hesitating. I advanced a step or two, looking steadfastly into his eyes. "Who are you?" said I. He tried to meet my gaze. "No," he said suddenly, and turning, went bounding away from me through the undergrowth. Then he turned and stared at me again. His eyes shone brightly out of the dusk under the trees. My heart was in my mouth, but I felt my only chance was bluff, and walked steadily towards him. He turned again and vanished into the dusk. Once more, I thought, I caught the glint of his eyes. That was all.
That was a nasty hit.
For the
Cash
first
flow.
time, I realized how the lateness of the hour might affect me. The sun had set some minutes since. The swift dusk of the tropics was already fading out of the eastern sky, and a pioneer moth fluttered silently by. Unless I would spend the night among the unknown dangers of the mysterious forest, I must hasten back to the enclosure. The thought of the return to that pain-haunted refuge was extremely disagreeable. Still more so was the idea of being overtaken in the open by darkness, and all that darkness might conceal. I gave one more look into the blue shadows that had swallowed up this odd creature, and then retraced my way down the slope towards the stream. going, as I judged, in the direction from which I had come. I walked eagerly, my mind confused with many things, and presently found myself in a level place among scattered trees. The colorless clearness that comes after the sunset flushed me starkly. The blue sky above grew momentarily deeper, and the little stars, one by one, pierced the attenuated light. The interspaces of the trees, the gaps in the further vegetation that had been hazy blue in the daylight, grew black and mysterious. I pushed on. The color vanished from the world. The treetops rose against the luminous blue sky in inky silhouette, and all below the outline melted into one formless blackness. Presently, the trees grew thinner, and the shrubbery undergrowth more abundant. Then there was a desolate space covered with a white sand, then another expanse of tangled bushes. I did not remember crossing the sand opening before. I began to be tormented by a faint rustling upon my right hand. I thought at first
10 o'clock and that dog wants to run around and start playing.
Save for the evening
Sleeps most of the day. Well,
then
parts
when
of
I
the
turned
day.
to hurry on again, there was an echo to my footsteps. I turned away from the thickets, keeping to the more open ground, and endeavoring by sudden turns now and then to surprise something in the fact of creeping upon me. I saw nothing. Nevertheless, my sense of another presence grew steadily. I increased my pace, and after some time came to a slight ridge, crossed it, and turned sharply, regarding it steadfastly from the other side. It came out black and clear-cut against the darkening sky. Presently, a shapeless lump heaved up momentarily against the skyline and vanished again. I felt assured now that my tawny-faced antagonist was stalking me once more, and coupled with that was another unpleasant realization that I had lost my way. For a time I hurried on, hopelessly perplexed, and pursued by that stealthy approach. Whatever
It always
was,
feels good to
the
be
thing
nice and
either lacked the
medicated.
courage to attack me, or it was waiting to take me at some disadvantage. I kept studiously to the open. At times I would turn and listen. Presently I had half persuaded myself that my pursuer had abandoned the chase, or was a mere creation of my disordered imagination. Then I heard the sound of the sea. I quickened my footsteps almost into a run, and immediately there was a stumble in my rear. I turned suddenly and stared at the uncertain trees behind me. One black shadow seemed to leap into another. I listened, rigid, but heard nothing but the creep of blood in my ears. I thought that my nerves were unstrung, that my imagination was
Let me see.
turned resolutely towards the sound of the sea again.
It's cooled down some. It's only 79 out right now.
And I emerged upon a bare, low headland running out into the somber water.
10 o'clock at night and it's 79 degrees.
Clear, and the reflection of the growing multitude of the stars shivered in the tranquil heaving of the sea. Some way out, the wash upon an irregular band of reef shore, with a pallid light of its own. Westward, I saw the zodiacal light mingling with the yellow
Our weather is
morning star.
slowly cooling down.
Those fell away from me.
We're no longer having
Westward, it was
100-degree
like
weather
the
every day. It's
Then I
gone down
recalled
to
the fact that Morose Beach
the
lay
mid 90s to the high 90s.
A twig snapped behind me, and there was
Oh
a
shit,
rust.
pouring rain around 50 degrees,
Stood
huh?
facing the dark trees. I could see nothing, or else I could see too much. Every dark form in dimness had its ominous quality, its peculiar suggestion of alert watchfulness. So I stood for perhaps a minute. Then
I wish it was like that over here. We definitely need the
turned
rain.
westwards to cross the headland. And as I moved, one among the lurking shadows,
We need the rain, but it tends to flood us out once in a while.
my heart beat quickly. Presently, the broad sweep of the bay to the westward became visible, and I halted again. The noiseless shadow halted a dozen yards from me. A little point of light shone on the further bend of the curve, and the grey sweep of the sandy beach lay faint under the starlight. Perhaps 2 miles away was that little point of light. To get to the beach, I should have to go through the trees where the shadow was blurred, and down a bushy slope. I could see the thing rather more distinctly now. It was no animal, for it stood erect, and that I opened my mouth to speak, and found a hoarse phlegm choked my voice. I tried again and shouted, "Who is there?" There was no answer. I advanced a step. The thing did not move, only gathered itself together. My foot struck a stone. That gave me an idea. Without taking my eyes off the black form before me, I stooped and picked up this lump of rock. But at my motion, the thing turned abruptly as a dog might have done and slunk obliquely into the further darkness. Then I recalled the schoolboy expedient against big dogs, and twisted the rock into my handkerchief and gave this a turn round my wrist. I heard a movement further off amongst the shadows, as if the thing was in retreat. Then suddenly my tense excitement gave way. I broke into profuse perspiration and fell a trembling.
1 second,
My
everyone.
nursery
Right back.
rabbit and this weapon in my hand. It was some time before I could summon resolution to go down through the trees and bushes upon the flank of the headland to the beach. At last, I did it at a run, and as I emerged from the thicket upon the sand, I heard some other body coming crashing after me. At that I completely lost my head with fear, and began running along the sand. Forthwith there came the swift patter of soft feet in pursuit. I gave a wild cry, and redoubled my pace. Some dim black things, about 3-4 times the size of rabbits, went running or hopping up from the beach towards the bushes as I passed. So long as I live, I shall remember the terror of that chase. I ran near the water's edge, and heard every now and then the splashes of the feet that gained upon me. Far away, hopelessly far, was the yellow light. All the night about us was black and still. Splash, splash, came the pursuing feet, nearer and nearer. I felt my breath going, for I was quite out of training. It whooped as I drew it, and I felt the pain like a knife at my side. I perceived the thing would come up with me long before I
Oh yeah,
reached
Shaw's
the
Prospect.
and desperate and sobbing for my
I'm
breath,
still here
I
too.
wheeled round upon it and struck at it as it came upon me, struck with all my strength. The stone came out of the sling of the handkerchief as I did so. As I turned, the thing, which had been running on all fours, rose to its feet, and the missile fell fair on its left temple. The skull rang loud, and the animal man blundered into me, thrust me back with its hands, and went staggering past me to fell headlong upon the sand with its face in the water.
Hell yeah, OG. I'll probably be on tomorrow, like in the morning and in the evening again.
I could not bring myself.
Thanks
to
for
approach
stopping by. You be safe too.
I left it there, with the water rippling around it under the still stars, and giving it a white berth, pursued my way towards the yellow glow of the house. Presently, with a positive effect of relief, came the pitiful moaning of the boom, the sound that had originally driven me out to explore this mysterious island. At that, though I was faint and horribly fatigued, I gathered together all my strength, began running again towards the light. I thought I heard a voice.
Oh, I'm not getting off. I was telling OG to have a good night. He said he'll be back tomorrow if I'm on.
This is a LibriVox recording. All
I'm
LibriVox
still staying on
recordings
for a
are in
little
the
bit.
public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
Oh yeah.
Recording by Meredith Hughes, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. Chapter 10. The Crying of the Man. As I drew near the house, I saw that the light shone from the open door of my room, and then I heard, coming from out the darkness at the side of that orange oblong, the voice of Montgomery shouting, "Prendick!" I continued running. Presently I heard him again. I replied by a feeble,
Oh yeah, Shaw's
and in another
Prospecting.
moment had
Definitely
staggered.
appreciate it.
"Where have you been?" said he, holding me at arm's length so that the light from the door fell on my face. "We have both been so busy that we forgot about you until about half an hour ago." He led me into the room and sat me down in the deck chair. For a while I was blinded by the light. "We did not think you would start to explore this island of ours without telling us," he said. And then, "I was afraid, but what? Hello." For my last remaining strength slipped from me, and my head fell forward on my chest. I think he found a certain satisfaction in giving me brandy. "For God's sake," said I, "fasten that door." "You've been meeting some
Last
of
ball.
our curiosities, eh?" said he. He locked the door and turned to me again. He asked me no questions, but gave me some more brandy and water, and pressed me to eat. I was in a state of collapse. He said something vague about his forgetting to warn me, and asked me briefly when I left the house and what I had seen. I answered him as briefly in fragmentary
What do you want?
sentences. "Tell me what it all means," said I, in a state bordering on hysterics.
This dog's
"Pumas are
crazy.
very dreadful," said he, "but I think you have been about enough for one day." The puma suddenly gave a sharp yell of pain. At that, he swore under his breath. "I'm damned," said he, "if this place is not as bad as Gower Street, with its cats." "Montgomery," said he, "what was that thing that came after me? Was it a beast, or was it a man?" "If you don't sleep tonight," he said, "you'll be off your head tomorrow." I stood up in front of him. "What was that thing that came after me?" I asked. He looked me squarely in the eyes and twisted his mouth askew. His eyes, which had seemed animated a minute before, went dull. "From your account," said he, "I'm thinking it was a bogle." I felt a gust of intense irritation that passed as quickly as it came. I flung myself into the chair again and pressed my hands on my forehead.
I definitely appreciate that, Shaws.
Montgomery came round behind me and put his hand on my
Right,
shoulder.
we try.
"Look here, Prendick," he said. "I had no business to let you drift out into this silly island of ours. But it's not so bad as you feel, man. Your nerves are worked to rags. Let me give you something that will make you sleep. That will keep on for hours yet. You must simply get to sleep, or I won't answer for it." I did not reply. I bowed forward and covered my face with my hands. Presently he returned with a small measure containing a dark liquid. This he gave me. I took it unresistingly, and he helped me into the hammock. When I awoke, it was broad day. For a little while I lay flat, staring at the roof above me. The rafters, I observed, were made out of the timbers of a ship. Then I turned my head and saw a meal prepared for me on the table. I perceived that I was hungry, and prepared to clamber out of the hammock, which, very politely anticipating my intention, twisted round and deposited me upon all fours on the floor. I got up and sat down before the food. I had a heavy feeling in my head, and only the vaguest memory at first of the things that had happened overnight. The morning breeze blew very pleasantly through the unglazed window, and that
Right.
indeed contributed to the sense of animal comfort I experienced. Presently, the door behind me, the door inward towards the yard of the enclosure, opened. I turned and saw Montgomery's face. "All right," said he.
Definitely what
"I'm
they
frightfully
want.
busy." And he shut the door.
They want us to be
Afterwards, I
separated
discovered
from each
that he
other,
forgot to relock it.
be at each other instead of banding
Then I
together.
recalled the expression of his face the previous night, and with that the memory of all I had experienced reconstructed itself before me. Even as that fear returned to me came a cry from within, but this time it was not the cry of the puma. I but hesitated upon my lips, and listened. Silence, save for the whisper of the morning breeze. I began to think my ears had deceived me. After a long pause, I resumed my meal, but with my ears still vigilant. Presently, I heard something else very faint and low. I sat as if frozen in my attitude. Though it was faint and low, it moved me more profoundly than all that I had hitherto heard of the abominations behind the wall. There was no mistake this time in the quality of the dim, broken sounds. No doubt at all of their source, for it was groaning, broken by sobs and gasps of anguish. It was no brute this time. It was a human being in torment. And as I realized this, I rose, and in 3 steps had crossed the room, seized the handle of the door into the yard, and flung it open before me. "Prendick man, stop!" cried Montgomery, intervening. A startled deerhound yelped and snarled. There was blood, I saw, in the sink, brown and some scarlet, and I smelt the peculiar smell of carbolic acid. Then, through an open doorway beyond, in the dim light of the shadow, I saw something bound painfully upon a framework, scarred, red, and bandaged. And then, blotting this out, appeared the face of old Moreau, white and terrible. In a moment he had gripped me by the shoulder with a hand that was smeared red, had twisted me off my feet, and flung me headlong back into my own room. He lifted
Started
me as
making
though I
my
was a
ears
little
sore.
child. I fell at full length upon the floor, and the door slammed and shut out the passionate intensity of his face. Then I heard the key turn in the lock, and Montgomery's voice in expostulation. "Ruin the work of a lifetime," I heard Moreau say. "He does not understand," said Montgomery, and other things that were inaudible. "I can't spare the time yet," said Moreau. The rest I did not hear. I picked myself up and stood trembling, my mind a chaos of the most horrible misgivings. Could the vivisection of men be possible? The question shot like lightning across a tumultuous sky, and suddenly the clouded horror of my mind condensed into a vivid realization of my danger. End of chapter 10.
All right, everyone. Call Into This Life for now.
This
Probably
is
be
a
on
LibriVox
again
recording.
tomorrow
All
around
LibriVox recordings
morning,
are public
afternoon.
domain. For more information, or to
Appreciate everyone who
volunteer,
keeps stopping
please
by
visit
and showing love and support.
LibriVox.org.
Until next time, everyone.
Recording
Hobo
by
Scum
Meredith
out.
Hughes.